Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Metal Mama podcast. My name is Candace, otherwise known as the Metal Mama, and this is episode one. Kinda, sorta. For the two of you who have been around, you'll know that this podcast existed in a form last year, but it wasn't great. The format was kind of crappy. I was trying to throw way too much into one thing. It just wasn't working. So I had to take a little break, figure out a few things, came back to what we have now, which is we have this fantastic show where we talk about all things regarding power metal and symphonic metal, and of course, a little bit of everything under that umbrella. And we will talk about topics from history to music to the bands and all the stuff in between. Now, how this works is once I say hello to everybody, I go into what has released in the last 2 weeks, and I'm not going to review what has released. Why is that? Because it's a lot more important for you to review it than it is for me. I may hate something and you may love it, or you may love something and I may hate it. I'm really not going to go too in depth with reviews or anything unless I am specifically asked to do that, which is not going to be for some time. Let's be honest here. Now, I know I haven't had a show 2 weeks ago, so we're not really in this time frame. However, I'm going to talk about a couple things that have kind of come across lately in the month ish of February. We're nearing the end of February now. I saw a new single from Avantasia. It is called The Witch with Tommy Karavik. I probably butchered that poor guy's name. You know, he's Camelot's lead singer. I thought it was a pretty good track. Now, I'm not going to get into the Avantasia debate. Maybe one of these days, but that is not happening today. Avantasia does fit in that umbrella of power and symphonic metal, so we're just counting them in here, okay? Dynasty and Majestica both have come out with new albums in February. I believe they were both in February. I know Dynasty's was, but I think Majestica was too. Anyway, I checked them both out. I thought both of them were pretty good. I liked them. I think Majestica is always really great. They're one of those bands that seem like they're having a lot of fun, and that's just kind of great to listen to sometimes. I thought Majestica was kind of experimenting a little with different versions of power metal going into those different little subgenres, but I enjoyed that. I thought that was cool. I am very much looking forward to Majestica coming to the United States later this year for Prague Power USA. I now live in Atlanta, Georgia, so I finally get my chance to go to Prague Power, and I'm freaking stoked, even though the tickets are stupid expensive. Holy cow. Dynasty's newest album, it's called Game of Faces. I think they released a single last year, late last year. It was called Devilry of Ecstasy. I actually really enjoyed the song, but I was waiting for this album. It came out, and so of course I was like, whoa, I'm going to go listen to it. I listened to it. I enjoyed the heck out of it. Hopefully, you will enjoy the heck out of both of those albums and that single as well. Again, I don't go through some comprehensive list of new releases because I don't think we have the kind of time for that. I just kind of go through what we can, maybe what I thought was significant or relevant, not doing any kind of in depth reviews on the music, more just saying, hey, here's some new stuff for you to listen to from bands you probably enjoy. Once I finish talking about the new releases, we jump right into the topic at hand. To begin the topic of this show, I am going to explain to you how I got this nickname in the first place. Trust me, it's relevant. I live in Atlanta, Georgia now. I only moved here a couple of months ago. Before that, I lived in Denver. I went to shows by myself constantly. I still do. And it's actually a lot of fun to do that. I know some people would be like, man, I wouldn't like going to a show alone. Dude, it is really fun to do that. You end up making what I like to call show friends. These are people that you see them at all the shows. You eventually start kind of giving each other the nod. Then it goes into shaking hands. Eventually, you start talking. You might hang out together at a show. That's how it goes. It's super cool. A lot of these people, I don't actually know their names, and I know they don't know mine. And several of these people are much younger than I am, late teens, really early 20s, and I'm in my early 40s, so I'm old enough to be their mother. A lot of times when I do see these guys at shows, I'm kind of making sure they're okay, making sure they didn't have too much to drink, they're comfy, they're not on anything they shouldn't be on, just making sure they're in good shape and enjoying themselves. Some of the girls that I've met who are younger, I've definitely had to body block a drunk dude or five because I'm much taller than they are. But At one point, somebody jokingly said, Candace, you're like the concert mom. And then somebody else said, no, she's like the metal mom. And of course, it went from there. So, how's that relevant to the topic? Well, it's relevant because of the young people that I have talked to so much over time. Being the same age as some of their parents, not all, they felt comfortable talking to me a little about their family life and things like that. And there was one thing that came up pretty frequently, which was their parents' reaction to the music that they're into. I was really, really surprised to hear that several of these young people have parents who still believe that just because you listen to metal, you're into some sort of cult or Satanism or something. That shocked me because their parents are close to my age. We all lived through this whole thing together, y'all. And the fact that they don't know the reality of it yet is a little mind boggling to me. However, it is a persistent thing because of several reasons, which we're going to kind of get into these several reasons. I'm also going to explain a really significant part of history for metal. And it is something that began in the late 1970s. It was really, really big in the 1980s into about the mid ish 1990s, something that is now dubbed the Satanic Panic. Very well documented thing. You can look it up. I'm going to go into a little bit of it. This was a long running moral panic that lasted for nearly, not quite, but nearly 2 decades. Most of you right now listening are very familiar with what a moral panic is. In fact, the United States is going through a couple right now. The United States have gone through several over time. Video games have been part of a moral panic, movies have been part of a moral panic. One thing though, when there is a moral panic, it seems like more often than not, certain genres of music somehow get pulled into it. A lot of times that is either metal or some form of metal, or it is some form of rap. Both of those have a reason. Both of those, for a time, were public enemy number one and targeted very hardcore by moral panics. And that is why a lot of times when there is a moral panic now, you see those two different genres of music still being targeted today. One thing that I can say is that anytime those genres of music are and have been targeted, nothing ever came of it. All these things that they are accused of doing and this kind of stuff, it didn't always work out so well for the people making the accusations. Now, I do understand that some individual artists have been accused of things and have gotten in trouble for it. I am not talking about individual artists, I am talking about the music genres as a whole. They've been accused in the past of inciting people to violence, inciting people to have premarital sex, inciting people to do drugs and drink alcohol, be part of the occult, recruit them into Satanism. This was not something targeted at a specific artist, these were things that were targeted at genres as a whole. I am going to speak more on the moral panic and the satanic panic that hit metal in the late 70s through to the mid ish 90s, because that is one thing that I know quite a bit about. And the truth of the matter is, it has impacted metal today. But first, I'm going to explain what happened, why it happened, some significant moments during this satanic panic. And also for those of you that have problems with family members actually believing this, bullshit, because that's what it is. It's bullshit. You now have a little bit of fuel to bring to them and be like, yeah, this didn't actually this isn't true. Truth of the matter is, they probably won't listen to you, but at least you know now. One thing that I will mention, so nobody tries to come at me, when I say metal from here on out, it is a very big, all encompassing word. At the time, when you would watch news reports, read the newspaper, listen to news reports, you would always hear something called either hard rock or metal. It was an umbrella term. A lot of the subgenres of metal we listen to today didn't actually exist back then. Some of them did exist, but they didn't have a name yet. Metal and hard rock was usually very interchangeable within the media, and it was an umbrella term. It is going to be an umbrella term for here too. Let's jump right in and explain what the Satanic Panic was. It was driven by religious and political motivations. However, the media picked it up and turned it into literally hysteria because they sensationalized everything. In the late 1900s, I feel so stupid saying that. I'm not, no, that doesn't work. In the late 20th century? That feels even worse. Holy cow. Okay, yeah, in the at 1980s. There we go. It started in the 70s. It was really, really big in the 80s, though. There was this massive surge in conservative Christian pushes. And there was this group of people that were dubbed the moral majority. The interesting thing about the moral majority is there was no way to really define them. They were everything from literal fundamentalist cults all the way to just super conservative Christians. But they all had this goal in mind. And this goal was that society was falling apart and decaying. And I mean, it was the ultimate version of pearl clutching and won't someone think of the children? A lot of people did this for political gain or they wanted to push a political policy forward. In order to do that, of course, they had to fearmonger and they had to find something to make people afraid of. For some reason, they decided that Satanism was what everybody needed to fear. Satanism was this massive threat that threatened the entirety of the United States and was definitely threatening your children. I don't know why. I cannot comprehend who decided this was a good one, but it was the thing. Every time you looked, every corner you looked around, there was Satanism trying to recruit you. I don't understand it either. There were a lot of incidents that made it even worse. Some of these incidents didn't actually happen. Some of them were connections created by the media that weren't actually there, which I'm going to go to in a minute. One thing that was being targeted was metal. But why metal? Why metal? How did that even get in the middle of this? How was that part of this? I would take an educated guess and say that it's because of the fact that metal was growing significantly more popular at this time. It was something that teenagers really enjoyed, younger people really enjoyed. It was different. It was a little edgy. There was some imagery being used that people didn't understand. There was some artistic expression happening that people didn't really understand. There were dudes with really long hair that needed to, go get a haircut, hippie, and playing their guitars. And to the people who were heading this whole thing up, this was the total opposite of what they wanted. They wanted this perfect, leave it to beaver looking nuclear family thing going on. And metal was everything that was not. So, in my own personal opinion, this is not something that I've gone into deep research on. I do believe that's why metal was targeted by this group. Rock was public enemy number one to them. They were now capitalizing on all of this. They had set the stage for this fear mongering. They found dots to connect where there were no dots to connect. And they were leading full on campaigns against these perceived satanic cults that were recruiting children. And of course, many of the metal bands at the time did have a little bit of darker imagery. Maybe their lyrics seemed a little bit darker. I can't personally say I feel like they were dark, but I know that some people could see that and say, okay, it was dark. Then there was this beautiful trick that a lot of people used to prove that some of their claims were true. You had people who were televangelists, who were people with political power, and who were preachers who were known as anti rock preachers. There is this thing called pareidolia. I think I just pronounced that right. Pareidolia. It sounds like it should be not a long A. Anyway, that is the ability for the brain that finds patterns and stuff in random sounds. You had a preacher, they go up on the stage, they're on the pulpit, they are telling you the evils of rock music. It is fire and brimstone, my friends. They put a record on the pulpit with, a little mini record player or whatever. They play this record. They tell you exactly what to listen for. The supposed satanic message that's in there. The problem is your brain is going to try and make that fit. And that's what happened. People's brains were going, oh, wait, yeah, I totally heard that. But they didn't hear it because it wasn't there. Another big claim that was made was that these people played backwards messages. And I think it's called backmasking. Don't quote me on that. I might not be right. You had bands that were constantly accused of doing this. I know Queen was accused of this. I think Led Zeppelin was. Judas Priest was. Ozzy Osbourne was, of course. Black Sabbath were. They all did it. They all did it. Every one of them. I cannot remember which band did it, but I know someone actually intentionally did it as a joke. Like they just put like jokes or nonsense or something in there. So when you did play the record backwards, you would actually hear this silliness going on. And I think that's pretty funny, actually, that they were just like, yeah, okay, whatever. The problem is there's no basis in any of this. The science doesn't science, first off. There has not been any studies that showed hearing backwards speech influences any kind of behavior. Yes, I did do my research before I started this show. The fact of the matter is, this was all fueled by fear and not any kind of facts. However, this backfired in a lot of ways. And the reason why this backfired is because this was actually boosting album sales, not harming album sales. Kids and teenagers, especially, we were using our allowance because we had that then to go buy these records. We wanted to buy these records. We wanted to hear this backwards music. We wanted to hear these subliminal messages. And if you don't know how a record player works, you don't know how a cassette deck works, you can go search for ancient artifacts on YouTube and you can find out how we managed to play this stuff backwards. Unfortunately, a lot of this was compounded by the fact that there were people who were capitalizing on this. And I mean, they were genuinely there to make money off of everything. So not only were they there to fuel this paranoia and go after all of these rock bands, but they knew that this was going to make them some money. There was a very famous preacher at the time who went around, he was known as a Christian comedian, claimed that he was part of the Church of Satan before he found Christ, claimed that they were indeed targeting your children and your teenagers. The problem is, several years later, everything he said was debunked and he was exposed as a liar by an actual, by another Christian magazine. And whenever confronted, these guys either A, doubled down, or B, they just disappeared. People were getting exposed as liars because of the fact that a lot of these people weren't having it anymore. A lot of the people, I mean, it was putting their jobs in jeopardy, it was putting their business in jeopardy. This was their livelihood. For many of them, it still is. And I don't think you'd like it if somebody put your job in jeopardy. Fuck, I know I don't. And they were kind of getting tired of it. They were getting tired of the media making connections where none were because the media was picking up on this so heavily. They were starting to create connections that didn't exist. For example, there was a really bad crime that happened that was committed by a young man who was a fan of Judas Priest. The media decided just because he was a fan of Judas Priest, it was Judas Priest's own lyrics that drove him to do this. There was another one where Ozzy Osbourne was blamed. Something horrible happened to a young person. They were a fan of Ozzy Osbourne. One of Ozzy's songs was then blamed for it, and it caused him to do this. These two were not the only ones that were blamed for this. There were several others that were blamed. I know Metallica was at one time a victim of this. I think Led Zeppelin was. It was so many bands, so many bands. Some of them, though, did go to trial, Judas Priest being one of them. When they went to trial, they conducted themselves very well. And it was surprising to people. Another thing that was surprising to people came about in the mid 1980s. There was this group of women, their husbands had some very heavy political power. They were known as the Washington Wives. I don't remember every woman in that group. I do know that Tipper Gore was one of them. They were everything a pearl clutcher should have been. They were thinking of the children and claiming that today's music was, today, meaning then, of course, was influencing children and teenagers. It was influencing us to do drugs and drink alcohol and have premarital sex and be violent and join the occult. I don't, it was, okay? It just, that's what they said. They had this list of the worst offenders. On that list were bands and artists like Prince, which I love Prince, and Cyndi Lauper, go friggin' figure. You had a lot of other people in this list. You had Motley Crue on there, AC/DC was on there, and a little band called Twisted Sister. Twisted Sister is actually quite important in this because Dee Snider shows up at a Senate hearing with John Denver and Frank Zappa. You can actually find this on YouTube. The footage of it is still there. And you can see these people literally smirking at him because my guy is a freaking rock star and he looked like Dee Snider looked in the 80s. Crazy puffy blonde hair all over the place, tight little skinny jeans on, looked like a rock star. But then he sat down and those smirks melted away because he opened his mouth and came at them with intelligence. He was articulate. He explained to them that he was also a father and a husband, explained to them that this was his job and also his art. They didn't know how to handle it. They were expecting him to make a complete moron out of himself. Because at the time, there was a stereotype of metal musicians. They were on more drugs than Ozzy and Keith Richards combined. They were having massive orgies in their hotel rooms, and that was before they completely trashed their hotel room and caused $20 million in damage, even if it was a Holiday Inn. And somehow they were still lucid enough to recruit kids into the occult while also influencing us to do all the stuff that they were doing, including trashing hotel rooms, apparently. Really, one of the dumbest stereotypes you can think of because the logic is not logicking, but that was the thing. But then you had somebody like Dee Snider show up, and all of a sudden, that stereotype went out the window. Or you had the way Judas Priest conducted themselves during their court cases, that goes out the window. Several other people were dragged into court for stupidity. They conduct themselves with intelligence. They're there protecting their business. Those stereotypes go out the window. Some people didn't know how to handle that at all. Some people, their heads started to turn a little bit. Their prefrontal cortex was finally being used, which, if you don't know, that is the area of the brain mostly responsible for critical thinking. Not fully, but mostly. There was a secondary issue here. If you noticed, I sort of switched gears a little bit. Metal was no longer being blamed for just getting kids and teenagers into the occult and Satanism. It was also now being blamed for inciting violence, drug use, sex, all that bad stuff. Because we now had two different moral panics happening in the United States. Metal was a part of both. But the worst of it, the Satanic Panic, was finally starting to die down. And the reason why the Satanic Panic was finally starting to die down is because of instances like the court cases and how they handled themselves, of how Dee Snider handled himself during the Senate hearing, of the fact that many, many court cases and many heinous accusations were being made. Every deep investigation was showing no evidence of occult activity. Not only that, but there were a lot of bands that were fighting back in one of the best ways possible, and I think it was exasperating to people. As I said, it was actually helping, not harming, sales of albums and concert ticket sales too. Because there were a lot of bands who were just like, all right, if that's what you say we are, we're leaning into it. They were so obvious about it, you couldn't say they were doing anything other than that. Or they would use controversy surrounding them as free marketing. I think Slayer actually did that once. And that is the opposite of what people were trying to make happen. People were trying to, I don't know, drive them away. And, you think cancel culture is just a new thing. My friends, obviously. This existed long before you were born. But again, these guys' way of fighting back was just saying, all right, let's go. That's us, I guess. It was having the opposite effect. And so, with it having the opposite effect, some people were so exasperated they were stopping speaking out against this stuff. Then you had people who were finally utilizing critical thinking. There were media figures who were starting to call out the hysteria and basically saying, hey, there's no basis in any of this. We can't find any basis. No investigations have found any basis. Y'all need to stop. But with the dying down of the Satanic Panic, of course, we had this other moral panic going on that involved a lot more than just metal, though metal was a very big part of it, with what eventually caused the explicit lyric warning to be put on albums in the United States. Because that group of women who formed what's called the Parents Music Resource Center, PMRC, I know is the acronym. I believe that I'm correct on that. Ultimately, the reason for this, there's a lot that happened in between, but that was the reason. And even that actually caused album sales to get better, not worse, but that's neither here nor there for this specific topic. Because of the fact that their whole thing of wanting to capitalize on this weird ass moral panic that was fabricated backfired in a really big way, it was actually helpful to a lot of metal. Well, how was it helpful? Well, first off, it allowed artistic expression to go even a little bit further. Well, this is not something that I did research. This is actually an opinion, more like an educated opinion, I suppose one would say. I think that a lot of the art and imagery you see associated with metal, especially the metal that we listen to today, would not have happened except for that. The music itself, the subgenres that were starting to come up, the sounds that were starting to change, the experimentation in metal would not have gotten so big in the United States would not have been so popularized in the United States if it was not for the fact that they were constantly demonized. Nobody would have even noticed. But because of the fact that these bands and this music and this style of music was constantly in our face, we all noticed it. I'm not sure how many of the subgenres of metal that we listen to today would have existed if it wasn't for this moral panic doing what it did. Because it truly did popularize metal. It allowed more people to get into metal. It allowed more people to create their own sounds, experiment, jump into subgenres, create subgenres, pioneer subgenres, take subgenres that were being pioneered at the time and make an actual name for them. Because if you are looking at what I'm talking about, you know that power metal was very much in its baby stages at that time. I'm not personally certain how many people would have jumped into that sound, would have gotten into that sound, and would have helped create it as the sound we know kind of in modern day, I suppose you would say, if it was not for the fact that it was so heavily popularized then by being demonized. Album sales were up. The more controversy a band had surrounding them, the more their albums would sell, the more people would listen to them. There were a lot of teenagers, though, just like my brother and I, that it wasn't because we were trying to be bad or rebellious or whatever. We wanted to know why. We wanted to know why you said no. You gotta give us more than that, people. So we went and bought the albums because you told us not to. And sadly for you, we liked it. And there were more moral panics to come that were featuring metal. There was a small moral panic over death metal at one time. There was a moral panic over video games, and somehow rock was lumped into that. It was a thing. There was a moral panic over the upcoming kind of mainstream shock rock, I guess you could call it. I don't know what you would call it. Marilyn Manson was one of them. When Nirvana first came on the scene, oh boy. Oh, no, no, no. Grunge caused a massive moral panic. These were moral panics that were much smaller in size and everything else than compared to the Satanic Panic, but they were still moral panics. Is metal in this all encompassing umbrella the only victim of moral panics? Oh, absolutely not. No, rap has been victim of moral panics since its inception. Going much earlier than this, jazz music was once a victim of a moral panic. It was also victim of a baby satanic panic. Jazz music was also satanic. I don't know why. That one I don't know much about, but I know it was a thing. Books were at one time victim of the same moral panics, and this was quite some time ago. This was over a century ago at this point, but books were evil and satanic and were going to indoctrinate you. And, being a woman, I should never have read a book. All of this together, I think, really did shape what we listen to today. Again, I'm not saying this is exactly the case, but it certainly did do enough to get enough people listening to it that they were able to start creating along with it. Not to mention the fact that a lot of the consistent imagery that you saw at metal at the time continues through today. And even though a lot of the imagery and its use and the reason why it was used has been debunked widely, there's still people that use it. Probably because it's just a stylistic choice now. In fact, I'm not sure why people still use it, but I know that they do. And then there is this stereotype that has continued throughout time. That stereotype of a drug addled, hotel trashing moron still exists today. That stereotype of this rebellious teenager who's wearing the band t-shirt with hair that's long and scraggly and playing D&D still exists today. And let me tell you something, that is totally wrong because I like my hair. I have great hair, but you guys, I don't know how you do it. My male power metal brothers here, your hair is freaking fantastic. I don't know what you use, but I need to know. It's so bad. It's like you always have better hair than me. Fuck off. And of course, those of us into different types and subgenres of metal will constantly poke fun at each other. Some of what we poke fun at did come from those stereotypes and those images portrayed back then, but we've learned to embrace it and laugh about it now, which I think is totally okay. But it could be worse. We could still widely be known to recruit kids into the occult. My pastor would likely be very upset with me if that were the case. And that is all I have to say on this topic now. Could I spend hours talking about this? Yes, because I way over researched for this episode. Didn't mean to, totally did. Next episode, we're going to look at a much lighter topic that we're going to be discussing. We're going to be discussing the intersection of fantasy with power metal and do a little bit of a deep dive on that. I just thought this would be a really fun first deep dive to take a look at. Want you guys to stay tuned. We have some super cool topics to come up in the future on the show, including something I'm super excited about because we are going to be talking about the science behind those beautiful power metal vocals we know and love. I'm going to be having a special guest on the show for that, somebody who knows this science very well and sings it themselves. No spoilers. My name is Candace. You can call me the Metal Mama, and I will see you guys in a couple of weeks. Fucking really. Every time I hit record, you start going nuts. Every time I turn on Zoom for a work meeting, you start going nuts. And explain to you how hard rock music. Damn it, Zero. And is it because we were terrible, rebellious kids and teenagers? I mean, yeah, we were horrible as God, we were bad teenagers. So, yeah, that is exactly why that was, I guess. I may hate something and you may love it. Get down.